Well, the clockmaking was started in Connecticut really about 1800 when Eli Terry in Plymouth married and started these wooden works clock manufacturing. He made a few a year. Sometimes he would, around 1803, he was making perhaps 100 a year. And after he got a few made, he would put them on his horse, pack them, and go out to the western country to sell them. Western country being as far as Poughkeepsie, New York, or White Plains, and he'd come back. Sometime he'd have a ham in lieu of cash payments, and he'd start to make it some more. However, about 1805, the Porter brothers of Waterbury contracted him to make 4,000 clocks, movements with a dial. They were to supply the material, and he was supposed to supply the movement, dial, the bob, and the pendulum rod. And he undertook that contract, which everyone thought at the time he was cuckoo, because it was unheard of making that many clocks. But he had a vision. He hired Seth Thomas and Silas Hoadley. Both men were joiners, carpenters, house builders, to help him make the machinery and develop the process for making these in production. Well, the first year they worked, they didn't produce one clock, but they did produce the equipment to mass produce these clocks. And the first year, nothing. The second year, they were able to produce 1,000 clocks complete. Third year, they produced 3,000, completing the 4,000 clock order. It was unheard of. But what he actually did, most of all, was to create mass production through quality control and interchangeable parts. Had it not been for interchangeable parts, he would still be working on the 4,000 order right now. The making of cases and the movements was usually a separate operation, and you had a lot of outsourcing. Cases were made in Litchfield, Goshen, all over creation, and it was something like 80, 90 cents a piece for a completed case. And the movements were selling for between 75 cents and $1 a piece. I'm not actually a collector. I've been considered to be a hoarder. And I tried to get one from every maker in the area, and I still haven't got them all. There was probably 10 times this amount of makers with their own dial. Most of the dials were painted by the women, and they all had their own style. Some had more of a flair. They had gesso with a gold leaf painted on it. Some were just plain. Those were subcontracted out. One subcontractor was Candace Roberts, the daughter of Gideon Roberts. He was a clockmaker until about 1805, and her dials always had a bird up in the arch. Beautiful. This is a very unusual dial and movement, and the picture up here is painted in. It's all original, and it says President's Seat in Washington, which to me indicates that was the White House. There was the big building, the servants' building, the horse barn, and the hay barn. I would imagine all attached. The thing that amazes me is every time you see a movie about the British burning down the White House in the War of 1812, they show a big marble building, huge, and in fact what it was is just a plain old country house. The dials were made out of quartered poplar wood, very nice poplar wood, planed, and it had dovetailed spines in back, and it was coated with white lead. And then they would paint on the spandrels, the numerals, and the decoration using gesso. Some had gilding, but they did a terrific job. Chauncey Jerome was one of a joiner or a carpenter. He worked for Terry, making one of his first clock cases around 1815 or so. And he made the first pillar and scroll for Terry. And he then branched out on his own, and he really got to be a fantastic clockmaker or entrepreneur because he and his brother devised a 30-hour brass clock, which sold much cheaper and more. It was a much better running clock than a wooden works. It wasn't affected by moisture. They even had the dial with a large hole in the center for the salesman to show the prospective buyer. He said, look, here we have a brass works clock. You can see right through the dial and you can see it working. And his statement at the time was it could be got up for $1 less and sold for $1 more. But he really put the wooden works out of business. In about 1840, the wooden works phased out.